Vio una estela ardiente cruzar el cielo sobre su rancho durante la noche. A la mañana siguiente fue a ver dónde había caído y encontró algo que cambió su vida para siempre. Suscríbete al canal y comenta desde dónde estás viendo este video. The wind moved like an old ghost that night, dragging through the brittle grass and whispering against the weathered boards of the Harper ranch house. Its voice seemed to carry memories harvest seasons long past, winters that had frozen cattle in their pens, the faint echo of laughter that had not belonged to this place in many years. Inside, a single lamp cast a soft amber circle across the cluttered kitchen table. The faint light fell over a scatter of tools, a tin cup, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, and a saddle that had been repaired so many times it looked more scar than leather. Eli Harper bent over it out of habit, not need. His movements were slow and methodical, the rhythm of someone who had learned that work, any work, was the only thing that kept silence from devouring a man whole. Rex, his border collie, lay curled by the stove, one paw twitching in a dream. The radio on the shelf stuttered through a static haze before finding a voice, a calm announcer explaining that a meteor shower would pass over the northern plains through the night. Eli half listened, his focus still on the stitching beneath his calloused fingers. It was strange, he thought, how easily the world could talk about wonders like falling stars when life in the valley hadn't changed in decades. He didn't look up until the saddle thread snapped between his fingers. The sound of it breaking felt too loud in the still room. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. Outside the window was only his reflection, caught in the dark glass. A broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, hair gone silver around the temples, eyes pale and lined with weather. Behind that reflection stretched the night black and endless, the kind that made a man feel smaller than dust. The windmill out back creaked once. Then again, the rhythm oddly offbeat, like the pulse of something living. 8 years had passed since his son had left for the city and never come back. His wife had been gone far longer, buried in a corner of the small cemetery that the snow had covered so many times he could no longer remember where the fence had once been. The ranch had outlasted them all, his father, his brother, his neighbors. It had become less a home and more a stubborn habit of survival. Every winter was a gamble, every spring a reprieve. Tonight should have been no different. When the first flash came, he thought the lamp had exploded. The entire room went white, and the window flared with light so bright that the reflection vanished, replaced by a burning streak ripping across the sky. The boards of the house groaned as if the wind had grown hands and pushed against them. Rex sprang to his feet, barking once, twice, then whining deep in his throat. Eli stood motionless. He could feel the tremor through the soles of his boots, a silent vibration that seemed to come not from the air, but from the ground itself. Then as suddenly as it came, the light was gone. The darkness rushed back like water closing over a wound. A single distant rumble rolled through the valley, low and resonant, like thunder buried beneath the earth. Eli set the saddle aside and went to the door. When he opened it, the cold struck him like a slap. The air smelled of snow and iron. The stars above were sharp as glass, yet the horizon to the north burned faintly orange, a bruised glow spreading across the hills. "Well," he muttered, though his voice sounded thin and foreign in the open air, "there goes someone's damn plane." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. The descent had been too controlled, too deliberate. It hadn't fallen. It had chosen where to land. He stood there until the glow began to fade, then went back inside. The whiskey burned his throat as he swallowed, but it did nothing to quiet the unease gnawing at him. Rex wouldn't settle, pacing near the door, ears pricked, tail stiff. The dog had been with him long enough to understand the difference between win and warning. Finally, Eli set the rifle beside the bed and left the lamp burning. He lay down but did not close his eyes. The house creaked around him, expanding and contracting with the cold. But beneath those familiar sounds came something new, slow, deliberate, a heavy thud followed by silence. Then another, closer, as if a giant were shifting deep below the foundation. He sat up. The dog's ears twitched. The sound came again, metal on stone, dull and distant. Impossible. He grabbed the flashlight and swung his feet to the floor. The boards were like ice beneath his soles. The light beam cut through the darkness, falling across the far wall, the stove, the door. Nothing moved. Still, the vibration lingered in the air, faint but undeniable. He whispered into the emptiness, "Please," though he couldn't have said to whom the word was meant. There was no answer, only the steady hiss of wind against the siding. Sleep came in fragments after that, brief stretches of drifting, followed by jolts awake at imagined noises. Once he thought he heard something brush against the outer wall, soft and measured, but when he forced himself to look through the window, there was nothing but the faint shimmer of snow. Sometime before dawn, the vibration stopped altogether. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had. When the first gray light of morning seeped through the frosted glass, Eli rose and layered himself against the cold. Rex was already at the door, restless. The world outside was hard and gleaming, the snow frozen to a crust that squeaked underfoot. The wind had calmed, leaving behind a brittle stillness. For a moment, it seemed as if nothing had changed. Then he saw them, two deep grooves carved through the snow, running from the far side of the house toward the northern pasture. They weren't tracks, not like any animal or machine he'd seen. They looked as though something heavy had been dragged. The snow melted slightly along the edges, as if from heat. He crouched and touched the surface. Even now, the depression was warm to the glove. Rex barked once, then backed away, hackles up. The marks disappeared over the hill, where the land dipped toward the river and the distant ridge. That was where the light had vanished last night. Eli stared at that line of hills for a long time, jaw tight. The sky above them was clean blue, but near the horizon, he could still see the faintest trace of discoloration, an unnatural hue, a residue of something that didn't belong. He stood there until the cold reached through his coat and began to bite at his skin. Then he straightened and muttered, "Tomorrow. I'll see tomorrow." The dog whined as if he disapproved, but Eli ignored him. He went back inside, stoked the stove, and poured coffee so bitter it stung his tongue. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it a metallic scent that reminded him of lightning before a storm. The day passed without event. He split firewood, mended a broken latch, moved through the motions of ranch work with an old man's stubborn precision. But every time he paused, he found himself glancing north, toward the ridge, toward the faint bruise in the sky that refused to fade. As dusk fell, the horizon turned violet, and the first stars reappeared, steady, cold and watching. Rex lay by the door, head on his paws, but his eyes never left the window. Eli sat in his chair by the stove, the rifle leaning against the wall beside him, the lamplight flickering in time with the gusts outside. He told himself he'd imagined the noises, that the grooves in the snow were the work of the wind, that the light in the sky was nothing more than space debris burning itself away. He almost believed it. Almost. Then, as he reached to extinguish the lamp, the wind shifted. From far across the frozen plain came a faint metallic echo, slow, deliberate, dragging. He froze. The sound lasted only a moment, then vanished, leaving the silence stretched taut around him. He stayed that way for a long time, his breath clouding the glass, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the frozen fields and the river, something had fallen from the sky. And whatever it was, it hadn't finished falling. The morning came slow and colorless. A dim veil of light stretched over the valley like breath on glass. Eli Harper had barely slept. The memories of that sound, the metallic drag from the depths of the earth, still clung to him like smoke. He sat at the edge of the bed with his boots half laced, staring at the frost blooming across the inside of the window. Each line in the glass looked deliberate, carved by some invisible hand during the night. Beneath the door, Rex's shadow moved back and forth. The dog had been pacing since dawn, head low, tail stiff, nostrils flaring toward the floorboards as if something still stirred beneath them. The coffee was bitter and scalding, but it helped him think. He needed to see what lay beyond that ridge. He could lie to himself, pretend curiosity drove him, but it wasn't curiosity. It was something else, something old and primal. A farmer's instinct to know what had touched his land. Outside, the snow had hardened overnight, the surface smooth and gleaming like porcelain. The world was unnaturally quiet. Even the crows that usually perched on the barn roof had vanished. When he stepped onto the porch, the air hit him like a blade, clean and sharp. He pulled his coat tighter and looked north. The grooves he had seen the day before were still there, but more pronounced now, the edges frozen into shallow ridges of blackened ice, as if heat had scorched the ground before it froze again. He knelt and brushed the snow with his glove. Beneath the crust lay soil that smelled faintly of iron and oil. Rex sniffed at the tracks, ears twitching. He barked once, but the sound was brief and uncertain. Eli looked toward the northern hills, their slopes washed in the pale blue of morning. The horizon still seemed to hold a faint shadow, a bruise that would not heal. He saddled the horse, filled a thermos with coffee, and slung the Winchester across his back. The dog ran ahead as he opened the gate, eager despite the cold. The snow crunched beneath the hooves as they crossed the pasture. Every sound, the creak of leather, the faint snort of the horse, the soft panting of the dog felt too loud, as if the air itself were listening. The land unfolded before him, a frozen sea of white broken only by the black spines of distant cottonwoods. As he rode, his thoughts drifted between reason and unease. Maybe it really had been a meteor. Maybe the marks and sounds were nothing but tricks of thawing ground. But deep down, he knew the truth had weight. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the way the air seemed charged, like the moments before a storm. An hour into the ride, the wind shifted. It carried with it a smell he had never known before, acrid, chemical, biting at the back of the throat. Rex slowed, whining, his breath steaming in uneven bursts. Even the horse began to sidestep, muscles trembling under the saddle. Eli whispered calm words, but they came out hollow. He dismounted, leading the animal by the reins as they crested a small ridge. And there it was. The sight stopped him cold. Below, the valley had been torn open, a black scar slashing across the snow for nearly 100 yards. The earth was churned and smoking. The snow around it melted into glassy puddles that steamed faintly in the morning light. At the far end of that wound yawned a crater wide circular, its edges rimmed with frost and scorched soil. Thin tendrils of vapor curled from within, moving as if with a breath of their own. Eli approached slowly, every instinct screaming for him to turn back. But the pull of the unknown was stronger. The heat grew with each step. The dog hung back, growling low, his fur standing on end. When he reached the lip of the crater, the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising off a road in summer. At its center lay something half-buried smooth, curved, the color of iron before rust, yet with a sheen that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It was not rock. It was not metal as he knew it. The surface had no seams, no bolts, no cracks. When he crouched and brushed the dirt away, the glove came away warm, as if he'd touched the flank of a living animal. He froze, listening. A faint hum lingered at the edge of hearing, low and rhythmic, pulsing through the air. It was so subtle that he might have imagined it, but he knew he hadn't. It vibrated against his bones. He stood and looked around. There were marks on the far side of the crater indentations in the thawed soil. At first he thought they might be boot prints, but they weren't shaped like any human foot. They were long, narrow, with uneven spacing, as if whatever made them had crawled or dragged itself away. The trail led toward the river and disappeared among the trees. A cloud moved across the sun, dimming the light. For an instant, the object in the crater changed color, shifting from dull gray to a deep blue, as though light moved beneath its skin. Eli stepped back, heart hammering, but when he looked again, the color had faded. He didn't wait to see if it would return. He turned his horse and started home, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. The dog stayed close to his stirrup, ears flat. The wind picked up again, bringing with it the same metallic tang that had filled the night before. It seemed to follow them all the way back to the ranch. When he reached his yard, he reined in sharply. New tracks crisscrossed the snow-wide, heavy tire marks that hadn't been there that morning. They cut clean through the drifts, turning toward the north trail, the same direction as the crater. He scanned the open field, but there was no sign of vehicles, no sound of engines, only silence. Whoever had been there was gone. Inside, the warmth of the stove felt false, like a disguise the house wore. He stripped off his gloves, poured a glass of whiskey, and sat by the window. The glass trembled faintly in his hand, Not from age or nerves, but from something else, something moving deep beneath the ground, too steady to be wind. Rex lay by the door, his gaze fixed on the barn. Every few minutes he would growl softly, then go still again. As night fell, the horizon turned the color of bruised steel. The windmill out back barely turned, creaking once every few seconds like a slow heartbeat. Eli lit the lamp, its glow spilling over the old boards, soft and warm. He told himself he'd go to town tomorrow, maybe talk to the sheriff, maybe not. Men had laughed before when farmers told stories about strange lights. He'd be no different to them. Still, he couldn't shake the image of that thing lying in the crater, breathing heat into the frozen air. He closed his eyes, trying to remember its shape, but it was already fading, slipping from memory like a dream he wasn't meant to hold on to. When the lamp began to flicker, he thought it was the draft. Then the vibration returned, faint at first, then stronger, resonating through the floorboards. The whiskey glass quivered. Rex lifted his head, a low whine building in his throat. Eli set the glass down, staring at the window. The reflection of the lamp wavered, distorted by something outside, a ripple of light that passed across the snow and vanished toward the horizon. He stood slowly, moving closer to the window. Far beyond the fence line, where the hills rose black against the sky, a thin blue line glowed, faint but unmistakable. It pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat in the dark, then disappeared. Eli didn't move for a long time. The silence that followed was deeper than before, heavy with something unspoken, something waiting. He knew what he would do when morning came. He would follow that light, no matter where it led, because now he understood whatever had fallen on his land was not just a piece of the sky. It was alive, and it was calling. The fog came early that morning, rolling low across the frozen fields until the ranch seemed to float in a sea of white. The wind had died completely, and with it went the usual sounds of the prairie. No crows, no creaking windmill, no echo of the river beneath its crust of ice. Eli Harper stood on his porch, wrapped in his coat, the coffee in his hand already cold. The night's strange glow had faded from the hills, leaving behind only the memory of it, a faint shimmer at the edge of his vision whenever he looked north. He had spent most of the night sitting by the stove, unable to sleep, waiting for the sound to return from beneath the floor. But it hadn't, only silence. The kind of silence that made a man feel watched. Rex moved beside him, sniffing the air, tail stiff. The dog had been uneasy since their return from the crater. He barely ate, pacing the rooms of the house as if tracking something unseen. Eli didn't blame him. The valley didn't feel right anymore. The air carried a tension he could taste, metallic and cold, as if lightning were trapped somewhere beneath the snow, waiting for release. It was almost noon when he heard the engine. The sound came from the south road, a slow hum growing louder until it broke through the fog. Eli stepped off the porch, hand instinctively brushing the rifle propped by the door. A vehicle appeared, large, dark gray, clean enough that it didn't belong to this part of the world. It rolled to a stop in front of the house, the tires leaving crisp, perfect impressions in the snow. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, his build lean but solid. He wore a long black coat, gloves, and dark glasses that made no sense under the weak winter sun. His movements were calm, practiced. Government, Eli thought immediately, or something like it. The man smiled faintly as he approached, but it was the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "Morning, Mr. Harper," he said, his voice smooth and measured, like someone who'd learned to speak without revealing anything. Eli nodded but didn't return the smile. "You've got me at a disadvantage, mister. Don't think we've met." The man reached into his coat and produced a small leather folder. Inside was an identification card with a printed seal that looked official, but wrong too crisp, too clean, as though it had never seen the inside of an office. "Daniel Reeves," he said, "Department of Geological Survey. We're following up on reports of a meteor impact in this area. Big light show last night. You might have seen it." Eli studied the badge, but his eyes drifted to the man's boots. Around the edges of the soles, he saw it, a dark, oily residue, almost identical to the blackened soil at the crater. When he looked up again, the man was still smiling. "Meteor, huh?" Eli said, careful to keep his tone flat. "Yeah, I saw something. Didn't look much like a rock to me." The man's smile tightened. "Well, these things can be deceptive. Atmospheric distortion, reflection, optical illusion. We're just making sure nothing hazardous fell in the vicinity. Some of those objects carry toxic compounds." "Toxic," Eli repeated. "That right?" "Indeed," Reeves said. "If you happen to find any unusual debris metal fragments, strange residue, we'd appreciate it if you contacted us immediately, for your safety." He extended a card with a number printed in red ink. Eli didn't take it. He kept his hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of the folded rag there, the one that had brushed the surface of the crater. "This some kind of cleanup operation?" he asked. "You could call it that," Reeves said smoothly. "We're just trying to keep things orderly, prevent panic." Eli met the man's hidden eyes. "You get a lot of panic out here, do you?" Reeves didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past Eli, toward the barn, his expression unreadable behind the lenses. "Nice dog," he said finally. "Looks protective." Rex growled low, as if confirming it. "Well, Mr. Harper," Reeves continued, stepping back, "if you happen to see anything or anyone out of place, don't engage. Just call the number. The wrong people might get the wrong idea." He turned, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "And do yourself a favor, stay away from the north fields." Eli watched as the man climbed back into the SUV. The engine started without a sound, the vehicle rolling away, tires whispering over snow until it disappeared into the fog. The stillness that followed felt heavier than before. He stood there for a long time, staring at the tire tracks that now cut through his yard. When he finally went to the barn, he found something that made his stomach tighten. Near the door, half buried in snow, were footprints, smaller than the man's but fresh. They circled the barn once, paused near the window, then vanished toward the road. Whoever had made them hadn't come by car. The rest of the day passed in a haze of unease. Eli kept busy splitting wood, repairing a section of fence, checking the cattle, anything to keep his hands moving. But each time he paused, he caught himself glancing at the horizon, toward the direction of the crater. The light from the morning was gone, replaced by a dense, creeping fog that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It wasn't natural fog, not the kind that came from river moisture. It had weight to it, a slow, deliberate motion, as if something inside it breathed. By dusk, the ranch was sealed in it. The barn faded from view, then the fence, then even the nearest trees. When Eli opened the door, the mist pressed against it, thick and wet, muffling every sound. He bolted it shut and lit the lamps, their glow barely reaching the far corners of the room. Rex lay near the stove, eyes half closed but alert. The dog's ears twitched at the slightest creak. The hours dragged. Outside there was no wind, no movement, until there was. A faint scrape against the wall. Then another. Eli froze, listening. The sound came again, soft but deliberate. Metal against wood. He rose, heart pounding, and took the flashlight from the counter. The beam cut through the fogged window, but he could see nothing, only the shifting gray. He opened the door slowly, rifle in hand. The fog wrapped around him like cloth. He stepped onto the porch. "Who's there?" he called, voice swallowed by the mist. No answer, only the slow drip of melting frost from the eaves. He took a cautious step forward, the boards creaking underfoot. Then he saw it, the chain that hung beside the barn, tapping gently against the wall. The sound was harmless, explainable, but his relief lasted only a heartbeat. Beside the chain, in the snow, were prints, new ones, human-sized but narrow with an odd depth, as if whoever made them carried no weight at all. They led to the window of the house and stopped there. On the glass was a smudge, the faint outline of a hand pressed flat against it. Eli felt the cold rise through his spine. He circled back to the porch, locked the door, and sat at the table, staring at that window until the lamp burned low. He tried to convince himself it was old something from before, maybe a trick of condensation, but outside the fog moved differently now. It wasn't drifting, it was flowing, slow and purposeful, wrapping itself around the barn. Rex barked once, sharp and warning. Eli jumped to his feet and peered through the glass. For a moment he thought he saw something. Tall, dark, motionless, standing beside the barn, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. Then it was gone. He sat back down, forcing his hands to stop trembling. When sleep finally came, it was light and restless. Sometime before dawn, a sharp metallic clang jolted him awake. It came from beneath the house, one strike, then another. The dog went wild, barking and scratching at the floor. Eli grabbed the flashlight, the beam shaking as he aimed it downward. Between the floorboards, something glinted. A small, black fragment wedged in the crack, marked with a symbol, a perfect circle crossed by a single diagonal line. He reached for it carefully, and the metal was warm to the touch. Too warm. As he turned it in his fingers, the lamp flickered once, twice, and steadied. From outside came another sound, a faint hum, like an engine idling somewhere, deep in the fog. Eli moved to the window. In the distance, beyond the fields, a thin point of light glowed, steady and cold, floating above the line of the ridge. It pulsed once, then again, in time with the faint vibration that trembled through the house. He stood there, transfixed, the black shard still in his hand, the dog's growl rising behind him. Whatever had fallen into his valley, whatever had crawled from that crater, was not finished. It was watching, waiting, and it knew exactly where he lived. The sun rose late, though the light it brought was thin and weak, as if the day itself were reluctant to begin. The fog had not lifted. It lay across the valley like a heavy blanket, muffling the land and turning distance into shadow. Eli Harper stood in the doorway of his barn, the shard of black metal turning slowly between his fingers. The symbol carved into it, a circle slashed by a diagonal line, caught the pale light in a way that made his eyes ache. He could not decide if it shimmered or if his mind only wanted it to. The air inside the barn was sharp with cold, but the fragment was warm. It pulsed faintly, in rhythm with his own heartbeat, and each time he closed his hand around it, he felt that same dull vibration he had heard beneath the floor 2 nights before. He slipped it into his pocket and turned his eyes toward the northern ridge. The fog had thickened there, rising in slow, deliberate waves from the frozen fields. He had told himself the night before that he would stay home, wait for clarity, maybe call the sheriff, but he knew that was a lie. He could no more ignore the thing beneath that hill than he could ignore the ache in his bones. The valley had changed, and the change began there. By mid-morning, he was ready. He packed the lantern, rope, a canteen, and the rifle, then saddled the horse. Rex trotted beside him as he mounted, the dog's steps light but uneasy. They followed the faint trail through the pasture, across the frozen stream, and toward the ridge that marked the edge of his land. The fog swallowed the world as they climbed. Sound disappeared inside it. Even the horse's hooves seemed to fall into silence. He reached the base of the hill after an hour, guided less by sight than by memory. The old mine lay ahead, an abandoned shaft from his father's time, sealed decades ago after the last cave-in. The warning sign that had once hung on the fence was gone now, its post snapped and half buried in snow. The entrance yawned like an open mouth, framed by rotted beams and sagging planks. From inside came a faint exhalation of air, heavy with the smell of rust, stone, and something else, something older, stranger, that stirred an instinctive unease in him. Eli tied the horse to a leaning post, lifted the lantern, and stepped into the darkness. The sound of his boots echoed off the stone walls, joined by the soft patter of melting frost. Rex followed close, his nails clicking lightly on the wet ground. The tunnel sloped gently downward, its walls streaked with mineral veins that caught the light like dull silver. Every few steps he passed an old support beam, bowed with age and dampness. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, not the clean cold of winter, but a clammy chill that clung to the lungs and left a taste of metal on the tongue. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened into a chamber. His lantern revealed rusted mining carts overturned in heaps, their contents long emptied. The ground was layered with decades of dust except for one stretch, where it had been disturbed. Footprints. He crouched, brushing the dirt with his gloved hand. They were boot-shaped, but too long, too narrow, as though whoever had made them had been walking wrong, dragging their weight unevenly. And beside them, A long scar traced through the dust, as if something heavy had been pulled deeper into the mine. A noise made him freeze. It was soft but distinct, the shuffle of boots on stone. He raised the lantern and listened. The sound came from farther ahead, where the tunnel dipped again. For a moment he considered turning back, but his body moved before his mind could argue. He followed the footprints down the passage. The tunnel bent sharply to the left, then opened into a larger space he didn't recognize from his childhood. This chamber was different. The walls here were smooth, almost polished, and they glistened faintly as if wet, though when he touched them, his fingers came away dry. At the center of the room stood an object half covered by a torn canvas sheet. It was large, rectangular, about the size of a livestock trough but higher. Its surface the same color and texture as the shard in his pocket, dark, seamless, and wrong. He approached slowly, lantern trembling in his hand. The air around the thing felt thick, as though it resisted movement. His breath came shorter, his heart beat louder. When he reached out and brushed the exposed edge with his fingertips, the world seemed to pause. The surface was cold, but not the cold of stone or steel. It was the cold of absence, of something that had never been part of this world. The lantern flickered, its flame shrinking to a weak blue point before flaring again. From somewhere deeper in the mine came voices. Eli doused the lantern instantly and crouched behind an overturned cart. The darkness pressed close, but his eyes soon caught the flicker of approaching flashlights. 3 of them. The beams cut through the dust, revealing men in dark coats and helmets. Their boots were heavy, their movements practiced. One carried a device that clicked softly, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to quicken whenever it pointed toward the object. "There," said a voice, a man's calm but commanding. "That's it. Don't touch it until the signal stabilizes." Another voice answered, higher, nervous. "Sir, it's still active. It shouldn't be. The readings are wrong." "Then fix them," the leader snapped. "We can't afford another incident." Eli pressed himself lower behind the cart, his heart hammering. The leader stepped closer to the object, his flashlight beam glancing off its surface. Even from a distance, Eli recognized the man's face. The same cold smile, the same black coat. Reeves. The air began to hum again, faint but unmistakable. The men stiffened. "It's vibrating," one of them said. "Like before." Reeves took a step back, lifting his radio. "Control, this is Unit 2. We have movement. The crate's responding possibly to proximity. Advise." The response crackled faintly, but Eli couldn't make out the words. A moment later, the sound rose, the hum deepening into a low metallic groan that seemed to come from beneath the ground. The men flinched. Then came a sharper noise, a thin, piercing tone that cut straight through the air, through bone, through thought. Eli clamped his hands over his ears, gritting his teeth. The lantern shattered behind him. "Back out!" Reeves shouted. "Now!" The men stumbled toward the tunnel, their lights swinging wildly. Eli grabbed Rex by the collar and ran the other way, up the incline, half blind in the dark. The sound followed them, that shrill vibration rising until it felt like the whole earth was screaming. He didn't stop until the first glimmer of daylight appeared ahead. He burst from the mouth of the mine and collapsed to his knees in the snow, gasping. The fog was moving strangely now, twisting and folding inward toward the entrance. The horse reared, eyes wide, pulling at the reins. The air around the mine glowed faintly blue, the light pulsing like a heartbeat. Eli mounted, gripping the saddle with shaking hands. As he rode down the slope, he looked back only once. The fog had formed a vortex above the mine, spiraling upward in slow, deliberate circles. From its center, a thin column of light extended toward the clouds, steady and cold. He didn't stop until he reached the ranch. The lamps inside flickered as he entered. Though the power was steady, he poured a glass of whiskey, spilling some with the tremor of his hand, and stared at the wall until his breathing slowed. On the table beside him lay the shard of metal, dark and silent now. Its warmth had faded, but when he turned it in the light, he saw something new etched along its edge, tiny marks, too small to read, yet unmistakably deliberate. He didn't notice the message on the window until the room had gone quiet. The words were written in the thin film of frost that coated the glass, the letters uneven but clear. "Don't open the box." Eli stared at them, heart pounding. He rubbed at the glass, but the words didn't smudge. Instead, the frost seemed to bloom brighter where his hand touched it, as if the message were being carved again, over and over by an invisible hand. The lamp flickered once more, then steadied. Outside, the fog thickened, creeping down the ridge like a slow-moving tide. Somewhere beneath that hill, something had awakened, and now it knew his name. The night after the message on the window felt longer than any Eli Harper had lived through in his 58 years. Every sound, every gust of wind, seemed amplified by the stillness that had taken root around the ranch. The fog that had crept down from the ridge had not dispersed. It lingered in the hollows of the land, moving as though it had weight, thick enough to swallow the light of his lantern beyond a few feet. He had tried to sleep, but his mind refused. Each time his eyes began to close, he saw again the pale handwriting forming in the frost. "Don't open the box." The words had burned themselves into his memory with the same sharpness as the symbol on the black shard. By dawn, he had made his decision. He could not sit in this house another day, waiting for whatever had crawled out of that mind to come for him. If he wanted peace, he needed answers. But first, he had to make sure the thing inside that box, the one that hummed, the one that glowed, was truly contained. He filled his thermos, loaded the rifle, and stepped outside. The world was so quiet that even the crunch of snow beneath his boots sounded like gunfire. Rex trotted at his side, tail low, nose twitching toward the north. The sky was dull and flat, the sun a pale disk hidden behind clouds, its light weak and diffused. He followed the trail down to the river, the same route he had taken to the mine, though he moved slower now, each sense stretched taut. The wind had shifted overnight, and with it came a faint new scent, something burnt and chemical, like melted plastic and ozone. When he reached the bend where the river froze into stillness, he stopped short. The fog there had parted, revealing a dark shape in the snow. It was a vehicle, overturned at the edge of the embankment, one of those same gray SUVs he had seen before. Its metal body was twisted, the windows shattered, the paint scorched as if by fire. He approached carefully, rifle raised. The driver's door hung open, swinging weakly in the wind. Inside, the smell was sharp and wrong, oil, blood, and something that made his eyes sting. On the ground beside the door lay a man, Reeves. His black coat was torn, one lens of his sunglasses cracked, revealing a pale, expressionless eye. He was alive, barely, his breath shallow and rasping. When Eli knelt beside him, the man's hand twitched toward his chest. In it, clutched tight, was a small metallic cylinder, no bigger than a thermos. Eli hesitated only a second before taking it. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, warmth spread up his arm, a faint pulse that was almost human in rhythm. Reeves made a sound, half a cough, half a whisper, and Eli leaned closer to catch the words. "Don't let them have it," the man gasped, the effort pulling blood from the corner of his mouth. "They'll open it. Don't—" His voice failed him. His eyes rolled once toward the overcast sky, then froze, staring at something beyond this world. Eli closed them with the edge of his glove. The dog whimpered softly. The engine of the SUV ticked faintly as it cooled, the sound echoing like a heartbeat against the frozen trees. Eli looked at the cylinder again. The same symbol was engraved along its side, a circle crossed by a diagonal line. The surface seemed to ripple in the light, not truly reflecting, but bending it, distorting the snow's brightness around it. Inside, something shifted, too faint to see clearly, like a liquid that wasn't liquid at all. He wrapped it in a piece of canvas and tucked it into his pack. By the time he reached the ranch, the fog had thickened again, rolling in waves across the pasture. He unsaddled the horse and hurried into the barn, the dog close on his heels. The boards creaked under his boots as he lifted one of the old planks near the wall, a hiding spot he hadn't touched in years. Beneath it was a shallow space once used to store feed during storms. He placed the wrapped cylinder there, covered it with a layer of burlap and old tools, then set the plank back in place. The moment the wood settled, a low vibration passed through the floor. It was soft but unmistakable, like a slow breath drawn in and held. He waited, listening. The vibration faded. Only then did he realize his own hands were shaking. He poured himself a glass of whiskey in the kitchen and drank it fast, though it did nothing to steady him. Outside, the wind was picking up again, and with it came a distant hum, a sound not of nature, but of engines. He went to the window. Through the curtain of fog, he saw them. 4, maybe 5 dark vehicles, moving slowly across the lower pasture. Their lights were dimmed, their engines low. Men in dark coats and helmets fanned out as the convoy stopped. They moved in patterns, sweeping the fields with devices that emitted faint red beams. Even from here, Eli could feel the pressure of their presence, a military precision that didn't belong in this quiet place. Rex began to growl. Eli grabbed the rifle and stepped away from the window. Within minutes, the vehicles had reached the yard. He heard doors open, boots on gravel, the crunch of snow. A knock came, 3 firm raps on the door. He didn't answer. Another knock followed, then the sound of someone moving around to the back. He crouched by the window and watched as the figures spread out across the property, scanning the barn, the fence, the ground. One of them carried a small handheld sensor, a rectangular device that clicked steadily. Each click came faster as they neared the barn. The dog barked then, breaking the tense quiet. One of the men turned toward the sound, raising a hand. "We've got activity here," a voice called. Eli moved quickly. He grabbed his coat, slipped out the side door, and crouched low as he made his way toward the fence line. Behind him came the muffled thud of boots, the scrape of the barn latch being forced. Rex barked again, louder, and then a shout, "Dog! Control it!" followed by a single gunshot that tore the air apart. Eli froze. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. His throat tightened, rage and grief rising at once. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Another burst of orders followed, men shouting to secure the perimeter. He reached the far fence and crawled beneath it, the snow wet against his belly. Beyond the property line, the fog thickened again, swallowing him whole. He crouched behind a line of scrub and watched as flashlights danced through the mist. Their beams cut across the barn door, the roof, the windows. The clicks from the scanning device grew faster, almost frantic. "They're right over it," a voice said. "Signal's strongest here." Eli clenched his fists. The capsule. They were too close. He had to draw them away somehow. Before he could act, something else happened. A sound, faint but distinct, came from the barn itself. A slow, resonant thrum, like the deep tone of a struck bell. The men stopped. Their lights froze in place. Another tone followed, lower this time, vibrating through the air until even the fog seemed to shimmer with it. Then came the light. It seeped through the cracks in the barn walls, pale blue at first, then brighter, spilling onto the snow like liquid moonlight. The men stumbled back, shielding their eyes. The clicking from their device turned into a steady shriek before cutting off completely. "What the hell?" someone started, but his words drowned beneath the rising hum. The barn door shuddered. A beam of light shot upward through its roof, vanishing into the clouds. The hum became a pulse, steady, rhythmic, alive. Eli backed away slowly, watching from the fog. The figures outside the barn scrambled to their vehicles, shouting into radios that crackled with static. But it was no use. Whatever was happening inside that barn was beyond their control. When the light finally faded, the silence that followed was absolute. The men regrouped, confused, their voices uncertain. One of them pointed toward the ridge. "Orders are to pull back," he said. "We wait for command." The convoy retreated into the mist, engines rumbling low. Only when their taillights vanished did Eli return to the yard. The snow around the barn glowed faintly where the light had touched it, as though it had melted and refrozen into glass. The door hung open, the hinges smoking slightly. Inside, the air was still and warm, and in that stillness came a single, rhythmic sound, the slow, deliberate thump of something beating, faint but steady, from beneath the floorboards. He knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. The vibration was strong enough to feel in his bones. Whatever was inside that capsule was no longer dormant. It was waking. Eli Harper barely remembered crossing the yard after the men had left. The image of the barn door, pulsing with blue light, was burned into his vision even with his eyes closed. The air had turned dense and hot, charged like the air before lightning. And when the light faded, the world had felt hollow. He stood in the doorway of the barn now, his breath fogging in the chill. Inside, the board still shimmered faintly, glowing along the grain as though the light had been absorbed into the wood. The smell was strange, a mixture of ozone and smoke, and beneath it, something faintly sweet, almost metallic. He stepped carefully, the rifle still slung over his shoulder. The floorboards creaked under his weight, but beneath that sound came another, the steady rhythmic thump he'd felt through the ground earlier, a low and patient heartbeat that wasn't his. It came from the center of the barn, from beneath the boards where he had hidden the capsule. He crouched and placed his palm against the floor. The vibration met him immediately, a pulse that spread up his arm, through his chest until it felt like his own heart had fallen into the same rhythm. Slowly he pried the plank loose. The burlap sack he had wrapped the capsule in was scorched and smoldering at the edges, thin wisps of smoke curling upward. Inside, the metal cylinder had split along a clean seam, revealing a narrow opening that pulsed with faint light. The glow inside it wasn't steady. It flared and dimmed like a living thing struggling to breathe. Eli reached toward it, then stopped. A voice in his mind, his own, or maybe something older, whispered, "Don't open the box." He hesitated, but then the glow brightened, casting pale blue light across the walls. The boards around him quivered, and the hum grew louder. The air felt charged, pressing against his skin. He took a step back, but before he could move farther, the split widened. The top half of the capsule unfolded with a smooth, silent motion, like petals of metal peeling away. What rose from within was not mechanical. It had no shape he could name. It was light liquid, radiant, alive. It floated above the broken capsule, twisting in slow, graceful patterns that defied gravity. Eli staggered back, shielding his eyes. The light wasn't blinding, but it filled him with a kind of pressure, as if his body wasn't built to stand so near it. His heart raced, and with each beat, flashes of color and images tore through his minefields of black ice, stretching beneath alien skies, figures in white coats sealing containers like the one before him. A sequence of symbols written in light that felt like words but weren't. He saw faces, human faces, some afraid, some reverent, standing in a sterile room filled with the same blue glow. He heard their voices, not with his ears but inside his skull, phrases that came in fragments. Containment breach, biointerface active, retrieve the sample. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The visions came faster, colliding with his memories, blurring the lines between past and present. He saw Reeves again, not as the dying man by the river, but younger, cleaner, standing beside the capsule as others sealed it. The circle and slash symbol was everywhere, on the walls, on their uniforms, on the containers stacked behind them. It wasn't a warning. It was a mark of ownership. The light shifted, dimming slightly as though observing him. Then came something else, an emotion or the echo of one's sorrow, the sense of a long exile, of something trapped far from home. For a heartbeat, he felt pity for it, this thing that had fallen to earth like a wounded bird. Then the barn filled with the sound of engines. Headlights pierced the fog outside. Voices shouted orders, sharp and hurried. Eli spun toward the door. Through the cracks, he saw the glint of rifles, the black silhouettes of armored figures advancing through the mist. Reeves's men or whoever had replaced them. The hum of the capsule rose again, higher, sharper, like a warning. He turned back to it. The light creature hovered above the shattered metal, its form pulsing faster now. It was no longer calm. The boards beneath it began to rattle. "I'm sorry," Eli whispered, though he didn't know to whom he spoke, to the thing, to himself, or to the land that would soon burn. The first shot shattered the barn window. A beam of light flashed across the wall. The men outside were shouting now, their words lost beneath the roar of their engines. Eli grabbed the rifle, took a step toward the door, then stopped. The creature's light had changed. It wasn't blue anymore, but white, pure and searing, so bright that the shadows vanished completely. He understood then what Reeves had meant when he said, "Don't let them have it." This thing was not a weapon, not a fragment of some distant machine. It was something that should never have been found, something that didn't belong to this world or any that men could understand. He turned back to it, voice shaking. "I won't let them take you." The creature pulsed once, as if it had heard. Then slowly it began to collapse inward, folding its light back into the broken shell. The hum deepened, the vibration so strong it rattled his teeth. Outside, the soldiers opened fire, bullets tearing through the walls, wood splintering around him. Eli dropped to the ground, shielding his head as the barn erupted in light. It wasn't an explosion, not heat, not sound, not even force. It was simply brightness, expanding outward in an instant, so pure it erased everything. The fog, the snow, the men outside. For a moment the world became silent, white, and infinite. Then the light withdrew, vanishing as suddenly as it had come. When Eli opened his eyes, the barn was gone. The fields stretched empty beneath a pale morning sky. The snow shimmered faintly, fused into glassy ripples that caught the weak sunlight. There were no tracks, no vehicles, no bodies, only stillness. He rose unsteadily, his breath frosting in the cold air. Rex was gone. The capsule, too. Even the hole where it had been buried was filled, the earth smooth and undisturbed. He walked back to the house in silence. The windows were intact, the lamp still burning with steady flames. On the table lay his coffee cup, the same one he had left the night before. For a moment it felt as though nothing had happened at all. Then he reached into his coat pocket and found the note. It was folded once, yellowed, the edges damp. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was his own. "This isn't the end. Watch the sky." He stared at it, his throat dry. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet. Outside, the wind began to move again, whispering through the dry grass. He stepped onto the porch. The sky above the ridge was clear, the color of cold steel. For the first time in days, the fog was gone, leaving the land bare and open. He thought of Reeves's last words, of the visions that had torn through his mind, of the sorrow in that strange creature's light. Maybe it had been running from them, not toward anything at all. Maybe it had been seeking a place to die. Then he saw it, the faintest shimmer high above the mountains, a thread of fire unspooling slowly across the heavens. It was thin at first, like the tail of a distant comet, but as he watched, it brightened, painting the clouds in molten orange. The sound came next, faint but steady, a deep, rolling echo that traveled through the air and settled into his chest like the beat of a giant heart. Eli didn't move. He stood there until the light faded and the sky went still. But even as it vanished, he knew it wasn't over. Whatever had come from the stars had not finished its journey. It had only begun again. From somewhere deep beneath the frozen earth came a faint, familiar sound, a triple beat, slow and deliberate, echoing like a distant signal. The boards beneath his feet trembled softly, and for the first time since it all began, Eli smiled. The light had not died. It had only gone home. Suscríbete ahora para no perderte la siguiente parte. Activa las notificaciones. Mira el próximo video para descubrir qué cae del cielo esta vez. Comparte este video con un amigo. Escribe en los comentarios desde dónde nos ves.